What's up, everyone? I'm exhausted.
So exhausted, I forgot to mention that this is a side-by-side comparison with the GoPro Hero4 Silver Edition up against the Sony HDR-AS100V. Now we're going to put these guys through a lot of tests, so either sit back and wait for the play all button, or use any of these quick links to jump to the section you're most interested in.
I don't know what else to say.
So let's get out there. Start off by taking a look at both of these cameras. You'll notice there's a huge difference between 2.7K and 1080p. Now this is both of these cameras' maximum resolution at 30 frames per second. Now with the Hero4 Silver, we're using the latest 1.02 firmware. This came out after launch and actually improves clarity at 2.7K as well as some other resolutions. While the Sony HDR-AS100V is filming at version 2.0, which added some features and some, again, improvements. We have both of these cameras in their standard color profile. Now with the Hero4 Silver, we have PROTUNE enabled, which is its high bitrate mode, and we have its GoPro color profile, which crushes the blacks a little bit and the whites, and then sort of gives us this sort of nice color palette where the greens pop out really well. With the Sony HDR-AS100, we're filming in the vivid color mode, and it's a high bitrate mode, which is known as by two names, Pro Mode or XAVC. I might have that last part wrong. But the important part is that it's filming in this high bitrate mode, which gives both of these cameras the maximum quality that we can achieve out of both of these cameras. Now with the Hero4 Silver, there's a noticeable clarity, especially in distance objects, and if you look at those trees and the tree trunks, they're not as muddy as the AS100. Now with the AS100V, our sort of clarity over distance pretty much stays on par. Things that are close to the camera are just as sharp as things in the distance. However, with the Hero4 Silver, I kind of feel that things that are closer to the camera definitely are sharper. Now we switched over the AS100V to be neutral mode because we were kind of having a debate earlier in the year if vivid mode increased the sort of sharpness and clarity as opposed to neutral. Now with the AS100V, the neutral color mode does add a slight sort of washed out look, and what this is going to allow us to do is it allows us to color correct our footage ourselves later on with more ranges of values. Personally, I don't feel we're really losing any sharpness or clarity, and if anything, we have more options to play around with in post. Now we'll switch over both of these cameras to their flat color mode. With the Hero4 Silver, we have flat, and with the AS100V, we have neutral. And what we're going to do is you're going to see when we activate our vivid color mode in the AS100, and even with the Silver, there's a huge pop, especially in the reds. Now the AS100V does add a little more of a warmer hue to our plate. If you look at the rocks in the background, as opposed to being kind of white on the Silver, they all have a nice red tint. The car obviously pops a lot more, but look at things like the tire and the underwell of the tire. There's just a lot more detail on the Hero4 Silver. We have all those tread markings and sort of the name of the tire, very visible. Yeah, so as we zoom into 200% here, that's a lot more visible. And you'll notice that we're kind of losing some information on the AS100 because we are crunching those black values down so much. We're just losing some of those finer details. But again, if that's kind of an image that you like looking at, it's less work you'll have to do in post. Now with things in the distance, it's not as noticeable, but there still is a little more clarity in the Hero4 Silver. And if you look at things like the clouds, the Hero4 Silver's whites actually have a slight red tint on it. Now we'll take a look at the field of view here. The Sony HDR-AS100 has a very wide field of view. In fact, the farther we get out from the center in basically all areas, we see a lot of distortion, like that minivan gets wrapped and pulled. But the Hero4 Silver has this mode called Super View, and what that does is it uses parts of the image that are being cut off, and it brings them in and it crushes them in and it distorts it a little bit. Now as we switch back to our normal view, you can kind of see how take a look at the wheel, and then when we switch back to Super View, you see it kind of goes from being a perfect circle to kind of an oval. Now both these sort of super views have their disadvantages. They both add and bring a little bit of distortion. The only thing with the Hero4 Silver is you basically have that option to turn it on and off, but with the AS100V, it's just kind of always there. Now with the AS100, there is one thing we can do to remove some of that distortion, and that's by enabling Steady Shot. And what Steady Shot is going to do, it's going to put us into a medium field of view, and this is really the only way you can switch field of views on the AS100. Now this isn't true on older cameras, but it is on the AS100. And what Steady Shot is going to do is it's going to take all of those portions of the plate that are off screen, and it's going to sort of counteract the movements the camera is tracking using its built-in accelerometer to kind of keep your plate stable in the center. Now as we're doing this sort of light little jog here, it removes a lot of the jitters you're seeing in the Hero4 Silver. Now this isn't going to really help if you attach the camera to something like a bike frame and you're going downhill and there's a lot of high frequency vibrations, but if you have that same camera mounted to your body and let your body absorb some of those high frequency vibrations, it's going to counteract your sort of body movements, and it's going to make for a nice, more rewatchable footage later. Now the Hero4 Silver does have 3 field of view options that you can enable at any point, such as wide, medium, and narrow, and we're filming at medium right now just to sort of put these two cameras on par with one another. But that's the nice thing about the AS100V is this steady shot, especially when we're running down here, it seems really smooth, and you'll notice with the Hero4 Silver we just have a lot of sort of jitter and movement and stuff like that, and for nice handheld pans and stuff like that, it's really nice. It makes it feel like you're using a gimbal when you're not. It's something I never would have probably sort of encouraged people to use back in the day, but now it's sort of built-in accelerometers and sort of digital image stabilization. Sony is really taking advantage of that, and it's a really nice option to have. And I really hope the GoPro Hero 4 at least adds some free stabilization software into GoPro Studio. The GoPro series has always been excellent at filming underwater, especially since the GoPro Hero 3 when they first introduced the flat lens. And with the Hero 4 Silver, again, the flat lens is saving the day because all the image clarity underwater looks awesome. The HDR-AS100V ships with a bubble lens case, which if you used the Hero 2 back in the day, you'll know. It gives you very muddy and soft results, and it kind of ruins a lot of this underwater stuff, which is a shame, because the Sony, on top of having our vivid and neutral color mode, we also have the ability to pick scenes, and one of those scenes is underwater, and what it does is it pumps a little more red into your image to sort of balance out the colors. Now you notice our Hero 4 Silver has a very teal sort of tint to it, and that's because this water has a very teal tint to it. Now, if we had something like a magenta filter to throw over the GoPro Hero 4 Silver, this would actually give us very similar results to the HDR-AS100V, but it's just something we don't have to sort of worry about with the HDR-AS100, and it's kind of nice. So I'll hop out of teal water real quick and show you what the results look like in blue water, but the HDR-AS100V does a really good job of holding sort of a more neutral plate, while the Hero 4 Silver still retains some of that sort of bluish tint. Take a look at those tiles in the back here, look at the AS100V. Basically when we switch over, you'll just notice all of those tiles become instantly in focus with the Hero 4 Silver. As some of you are already aware though, the AS100V actually does have a flat lens case, and it's called the MPK AS3, and up until recently it was kind of a pain in the butt to get, but right off the bat, look how much sharper this image is. It's way better than we had before. If you're going to be doing any type of diving with the AS100, it's kind of a must-buy, but that's the part that sucks, is you have to buy it after you've already bought the camera. And it retails for about 50 bucks, so it's kind of a big hefty price increase on top of your already fairly expensive camera. But look at these results, they're way better, and then since we are pumping more red into the plate, unlike the Hero 4 Silver, we're not getting a lot of changes in white balance. But again, if we had a magenta filter, we wouldn't kind of see those results on the Hero 4 Silver. Now, both the Hero 4 Silver and the AS100V are capable at filming at 1080p 60 frames a second or 720p 120 frames a second. The Hero 4 Silver retains the ability to go into PROTUNE mode, which is our high bitrate mode, when recording this footage. And with the Sony HDR, it can only do that at 1080p 60 frames a second. Now when we drop it down to 120 frames a second at 720p, it's not a noticeable hit on the quality that I would say avoid using it, but it is just something to keep in mind. Both of these cameras will record in these higher frame rates while recording sound. However, with the HDR, you have the option to record it actually in slow motion, so you don't have to do it in post yourself. But when you do that, you lose the ability to record sound. So if you want to record sound and then mess around with the slow motion later, then you're going to want to sort of not go into that sort of high super slow motion option on the camera, and you'll record both sound, 120 frames per second, and you'll have all the quality there. However, with the GoPro, all of your slowing down of the footage will have to be done in post-production using something like GoPro Studio. It's all fairly easy, and you, again, retain all of the audio and stuff like that, and then when you slow it down, it will actually slow down the audio for you. So you kind of have that option, but it's not something the camera does automatically like the Sony is capable of. So In this next section, we're going to test the audio of both of these cameras. Now, it's important to note both of these cameras are not in cases. The Hero4 Silver is in the frame case, which is open, and the same with the HDR-AS100V. It's on its open tripod mount. Now, my buddy Gavork here is going to play a song on the acoustic guitar, and I think the results really speak for themselves, so let's get to it. So right away you could just hear the difference with the AS100V capturing a huge range of sort of frequencies on the camera, from everything from low to high. The Hero4 Silver just sounds very muffled. It makes you feel like I filmed it in a waterproof case, but it's not. Again, we're using the frame case 1.0, and it's a very open case, and when you listen to it by itself without putting it up against the AS100V, it doesn't sound bad, but when you put it right up against the AS100V, it just has it's just capturing such a larger range of sound. Now in this test right here, I know we kind of talked over it a little bit, but this is our contrast test, and basically it's just showing you what everything looks like in the dark to the light. So just imagine you're going through tree lines when snowboarding or driving a motorcycle, and you're going from trees to sort of bright distance. Kind of just gives you an idea of what that's going to look like. However, when we kind of open it up into this sort of low light situation where we're filming in the dark but we have light in the background, you see the cameras both do a really good job of balancing out those two areas, and that's excellent because a few years ago this was really bad. It would either make the front either too dark or the back too bright. Both of these cameras I feel handle that really well. Now with the Hero4 Silver, as we go further into low light, it does a really good job of making those nice rich blacks. If you look at that car in the bottom left, those sort of nice ruby reds, it looks awesome. The HDR-AS100V is kind of washed out and might look a little off-putting, but this actually saves it the further we go into low light, the further we go into night actually. So it's really just a personal preference here, but I really still like the way the Hero4 is handling these low light conditions, especially in that sign, the way the sort of colors pop and it's very rich and stuff like that. The roof is a little dark and stuff like that, and if we wanted to boost that up, we would have a hard time just because a lot of information in there is lost. With the AS100V, that information is there, and if I want to darken this image down and make it look more like the Hero4 Silver, I can, but it's just kind of nice for me personally not to have to do that work in post. So as I mentioned before, as that sun starts to set, it puts the Sony HDR-AS100V in a huge advantage. Now the Sony HDR series is fairly the only camera that I've really had consistent results and really good results at night. And that's because it has a back illuminated sensor. Now what this does is it basically allows the camera not have to pump so much grain to sort of boost the image. Now with the Hero4 Silver, it's adding a little bit of grain. It's not nearly as bad as the Hero4 Black in low light conditions, but you can see as when we zoom up to 100% here, the HDR-AS100V isn't introducing as much grain, but it is introducing a little bit. It's definitely not as sharp as it was during the day. Now with the Hero4 Silver, we still have a slightly sharper image just because we're not softening it up. The HDR-AS100V does have a little bit of softening to it, but this is sort of consistent with the results we saw earlier. With the Hero4 Silver, though, we have a range of options we can play around with to try and make our low light conditions better. So what we can try and do is we can try turning on PROTUNE, and what PROTUNE actually has built into it is a degrainer. So it kind of brings these settings actually slightly on par with the HDR-AS100. I feel you can see a lot of the grain in the shadowy areas, but it's kind of missing in some of the brighter areas, which is results we would expect. But it's not as close as I had hoped when I originally turned PROTUNE off. Now we could enable the flat color mode, which brightens everything up, but with that it brings all of the grain, and it just sort of times the grain by 4. Unfortunately, that's not going to really help us, and it introduces this kind of ugly green tint. Now what we can do is we can lower the ISO, because what the ISO is actually doing is it's controlling the grain. However, when I turn the ISO down to 1600, even with the GoPro color grade on, it's adding this sort of weird green tint, and I feel like this is an issue or an error, and I don't know why this is happening. We've done tests in the past where when it was on flat mode that it would go green, but you'll notice we've actually eliminated a lot of the grain. We can lower it down to 400 ISO, and that's going to reduce a lot of the grain, but the image is now so dark that we can't really see what's going on. So with the Hero4 Silver, I feel the ISO at 1600 is probably the way you want to go. I just don't know why that green tint is being introduced. And with the HDR-AS100V, we haven't had to change any of the settings to kind of keep a nice night consistent result. However, when we start to do nighttime photography, the Hero4 Silver is a clear winner. It just has a lot more options. We can mess around with the aperture, the ISO, we can just leave the shutter open for so much longer and have nicer results. The HDR-AS100V is at a huge disadvantage because the record button is in the back of the camera, and as soon as you press that button, it takes the photo, which pushes the camera forward and introduces a little bit of motion blur in your low-light photos. Now, if you have something like the remote, this won't be as much of an apparent problem, but you also can't change any of the settings still, so you are still left with these sort of very dark, very meh images. However, that's not to say the HDR-AS100V is incapable of taking good photos. In fact, it takes very good photos. It just really requires you to have that remote or the sort of phone app to really keep the camera stable when you take the photo. And the AS100V is taking its photos in a 16:9 format, but it does add again that sort of nice vivid color profile, and I actually think it looks really good and comparable to the Hero4 Silver. One thing I do want to point out though is if you are doing time-lapse photography, these are not the same results you'll get from the AS100V as you are in time-lapse mode. In time-lapse mode, it crops your image down to a 1920 sort of movie still, and it's nowhere near the dynamic range that we're getting out of just doing these normal still photos. With the Hero4 Silver, you're using time-lapse photography, you're getting the same results you're getting in these still photos, so just something to keep in mind if time-lapse photography is big to you. Anyway guys, if you made it this far into the video and I've helped you a bit, press that like, subscribe, or share button. If I've helped you out a lot, you can consider dropping me a donation or a tip to help me buy more cameras to cover. And speaking of coverage, this isn't the only camera coverage or even accessory coverage we're doing this holiday season. There is a bunch there in these links on the left side here. And if you guys need additional information such as firmware, maybe links, high-res links to these photos, check it out in the information section below. And if you don't see it there, feel free to leave me a question in the comments. It's probably the fastest way I'll get back to you, or you can shoot me an email at markhawkcam@gmail.com. Anyway guys, thanks again for the support, and I'll see you out there.